Okay, so just like we did the Old Testament, where we spoke about the sources from 100 BC all the way up until 1500 AD, now we're going to do the New Testament. So when you read the New Testament, you should ask a question, okay, I know this English translation, but what is it based on? What is the source text from which it's based on? And we already spoke about last time is when you get a translation, you want to make sure it's more of a word for word than a thought for thought, because thought for thought means there's going to be some biased positions written in there. And then I definitely don't get a paraphrase. I don't believe a paraphrase is even a Bible. I don't even think a thought for thought is necessarily a Bible, because they give the interpretation for it. You want to make sure that you can get directly to the source. What does it say? And struggle through those difficult passages and don't remove those difficult passages. So if we go from the very beginning, the oldest source text that we have is actually the Aramaic text, which is, like I said last time, it's about 400 to 500 AD. So the copy that we have today that English is based on is 400 to 500 AD. Then we have another thing. This is a very interesting book. This is the Diatessaron. And the Diatessaron was done by a guy by the name of Titan in 170 AD. This copy, I believe it's about 400 AD, the copy that the English is based on. And the reason why this guy did it was he wanted to take the Gospels, which is a lot of repetitiveness. He took that and he put it into one complete reading from the beginning to the end. Some believe that, for example, when you speak to the Muslims will say, in the Quran, it says, listen to those of the gospel as a singular versus a plural. So then you say, well, which one is it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? Some people say, actually, it was another one. It was this one. Because it was this one was distributed to many people. And so they believe that this was the gospel that they had at that time. Now, the next one we have is the Anglo-Saxon Gospels. Now, this is of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the Anglo-Saxon is very tough reading because it's not like modern English, but you can make out a lot of the words. And I like looking at this one specifically. For example, I look up Matthew 17, verse 21, that this kind does not come out but by prayer and fasting. And someone will say, well, is that actually in the original source? I'll go to the Peshitta, and the answer is yes. I go to the Diatessaron, the answer is yes. I go to this one, which is, okay, the Anglo-Saxon, this is a 900 AD. Some say it's 1000 AD. So 900 to 1000 AD. But this was the source text that they used was Latin. So the Latin that they had was about a 900 AD Latin that they translated into English. So 900 AD, right? And it has it. So next, we have Wycliffe. Now, I already spoke about Wycliffe earlier. But Wycliffe used a 1300 AD Latin in order to translate his text into English. But the funny thing is this, when he did it, no one did anything. But then after he died, people were so angry because you can't take Latin and put it into English. So they dug up his bones and they burnt him and they said he was a heretic. Funny thing is, 200 years later, then they made the DRB and they converted from Latin into English, and that was acceptable. It was a Catholic church, by the way. So next one we have here is the Hebrew text of Matthew. This is very interesting. Interesting in the sense that nobody knows what the actual source of this is. This is a 380 AD Hebrew of Matthew, and it's translated into English. Some would say that this guy, and I can't remember his name, copied it from the Latin at that time into Hebrew. Some would argue, no. It actually was Hebrew all the way along, and he just got a Hebrew copy of Matthew, and he translated it into Hebrew. This Hebrew text is 1380 AD. So whatever source he used, that's the source that we have. Now we get to the Tyndale version, New Testament. This one caused quite a stir, right? Because Tyndale took Erasmus. Now, Erasmus was a Catholic scholar, and he took the best sources of that time from about 900 AD, but majority 1100 AD to 1400 AD, manuscripts of Greek, Koine Greek. He compiled them, and then he translated it, or he put them together. He didn't translate it, he put them together. So Erasmus did this in around about 1516. So Tyndale used his Greek, Koine Greek, and the reason why Erasmus did this, because he wanted to show the differences between the Greek and the Latin. And so that's why he did the comparison. But so what happened was, Tyndale takes this manuscript from Erasmus, and when he takes it, he translates it into English. And you can imagine now he was a fugitive, right? And they targeted him. So this was in around about 1526. And the source text that he used was Erasmus's 1516 translation, or 1516, I believe. Then, a little later, obviously there's been slight revises on even Erasmus's. Erasmus did the 1 edition, 2 edition, 3 edition. So Tyndale did a revised version a little later. So Tyndale took the revised version of not only the New Testament, but also of the Old Testament, and this is like 1536. So just I think it was the year that he died. When I say died, he was burned at the stake. Okay, so you have this English copy that was based on the Erasmus's. It's known as Textus Receptus, or the received text. And so that's one. Then you have, and we already spoke about Coverdale. Coverdale used Tyndale's version, which the same source text was Erasmus. Then you have the Matthew's Bible, same source text. Then you have the Geneva Bible is based on the Stephanus. So what happened was, a guy by the name of Stephanus takes Erasmus's, or takes the same source text as Erasmus had, and he had other ones too, and then he compiled a complete set based on the same theme of Erasmus. That's why it's also called the received text. But it's which received text are you talking about? This one is based on Stephanus. Okay, so the Geneva Bible that was used in America back in the 1500s. Let me just kneel down. Based in the 1500s, this was the one that they used, was the 1560, and that was based on Stephanus. Then you had the Bishop's Bible, also based on the Stephanus. Then there was an update to the Geneva Bible in around about it says 1599, approximately that time. This time is where they used Stephanus, true, but they also used Beza. So Beza in 1598 did the same thing, but he added more texts to it that he found, and then he compiled one, also the same idea of Erasmus, and that was called, again, Textus Receptus, and it was of Beza. So the Dolly Reims, and this is based, this is a 1574 translation. Actually, it should be here. 1574 translation, and the text that they used was sometime in the 1500s. It was because of all the activity that they were seeing in terms of the Greek manuscripts into English. They wanted to come back at it and say, okay, let's take it from the Latin and put it into English. So what Tyndale started that they said he's a heretic. They eventually did it. Now we get the King James 1611. The 1611 was based on, predominantly, it was Beza, a lot of Stephanus, and of Erasmus. So it's not completely Beza. It was of the three. They took parts of it and they compiled from their text into English, and they used that in the King James. By the way, the Old Testament for the 1611 was the Ben Shaim, which is a 1524 Old Testament text. But we're talking about New Testament. So the New Testament here is 1516 to 1598. That's the text that they use in the King James. As we progress through this, you have, I'm going to skip this one because this is a parallel of the different Aramaic text. But here you have Murdoch. Murdoch is an Aramaic text that the English is translated from. The source text is in the 1600s, 1664, and the English translation is in the 1800s of Murdoch. Now we get on, obviously, onto the newer ones, and you've heard of the scripture. Again, a lot of these ones are based on the received text that we just spoke about. So now, as we progress through this, now we have the last one I want to talk about is the modern New Testament translation, or the interlinear, or sometimes known as the MLV. This one is based on the majority text. This is not based on the received text in any way, but they use that as one of the components. The reason why they call it the majority text is because in the early 1900s, there was a guy by the name of von Sorgen. What von Sorgen did was he compiled manuscripts that he had available at that time. They ranged from around about 1,200 to 1,100 to 1,500, 1,600 AD. So he took those manuscripts, and he had about 400 of them. Okay, 400. So it's not necessarily the majority. It was more of a majority that he had, and yes, there's a lot of manuscripts that he had, but predominantly it came from Alexandria. A lot of those texts, and we all know that the corruption took place in Alexandria over the years. But anyway, so you got 400, and you compile 400 and like 14 texts in the early 1910s. Then what happened was a guy by the name of in the 1980s, a guy by the name of Hodges and Farstad took his stuff and they compiled one Greek text, and they called this the majority text. And this is where they translate everything from this. So the MLV comes from that. If you want the best copy or English translation of the majority text, I would say it's not Robinson and Pearson, which is this one is based on. The best one is actually the EMT, the English majority translation by Hodges and Farstad. First they put it into Greek, and then they translated it into English from the Greek. So I would say use that one if you wanted to use it. I think that covers the entire set. You'll say, well, what about the ESV, Andre? What about the ESV? The New Testament is based on the critical text. The critical text was compiled in 1881. In 1881, there were three predominant texts that they used. The one was called the Sinaiticus. The other one was called the Vaticanus, and the other one was called the Alexandrian text. They say that these all were around about 300 to 400 AD, and they used these three to compile the critical text. The problem is, if you look into the sources of these ones, you'll be surprised. Firstly, you would think that if, let's say, you have three texts, one has it in, and two don't have it in, you would leave it out. But they didn't do that. Sometimes they would include it. Sometimes they would take some stuff out. I think the key thing that you think about is on the critical text, there's 3,000 Greek words missing. approximately 3,000. This is like leaving the book of Ephesians out. But the thing is, these words are not like in us, not in one book. They're spread throughout the scriptures. And if you study the book of Revelation, this is where it's key. There are, not only is some things taken out, there are some things that the words are changed. So it does impact your understanding of certain scriptures. Now I know I'm going to get some haters. They're going to be, oh, you're wrong. Well, how about this? Instead of listening to the professors and what someone has told them, how about doing the resource or the research yourself and looking back at these earlier sources, like the prosciutto. Look at, and by the way, don't use some of the prosciutto that exists, like this one over here. I have it up here somewhere. Where do I have it? It's where the modern prosciutto is not based on the early manuscripts. They've taken it and then they filtered it through the critical text. They go, okay, we must take this out because the critical text says this, therefore we take the section out. So don't trust the modern translations of the Syriac or the Aramaic text because they have fudged some of these things. So first you go and find it all these Greek words. So let's take, for example, Mark 16. From Mark 16, from 9 to 20 is not in the critical text. But they put it in there, in the ESV, because they know there'll be an uproar. And then they'll say it's not in earlier manuscripts, implying that actually somebody added to it. So when you see this, you say, well, okay, what do? You go to the earlier manuscripts. You go, say, to prosciutto. You go to the Latin Vulgate. So you have Aramaic, the Latin Vulgate. You look at the received text, the 1500s, which is based on a 1000, there's some earlier, but say 1100 to 1400 AD. And you see it all there. And then you hear they say, no, but this is earlier. And I would say, well, you're looking at, for example, you're using three manuscripts. One, Alexandrian text. The Alexandrian text does have it in there. Why did you leave it out? You have the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus that don't. So now you look into the Vaticanus. You go, oh, the Vaticanus is the Vatican was the one that actually brought to light in the 1800s, only after the Sinaiticus was so-called discovered. But the Vaticanus is actually a 1500 work. And you can see, if you look at the text, just do yourself a favor, look at the text, you'll see it's like somebody writing over it with a pen. Or not pen, but some kind of stuff. It's not like it's the original. So you can't even make certain that if this is the text. So it's not so the Vaticanus is wrong in the first place. Then the Sinaiticus is actually a work by a guy by the name of Simonides. Simonides in the 1800s, he was doing it for his uncle, and he was copying it on. He took these old parchments, and he thought, I want to give it as a gift. So he wrote it down, the New Testament in Koine Greek, because he was a very famous, by the way, at that time, paleographer. And so he wrote it down, and as he'll come back and he'll continue working on it in St. Catherine's. A guy by the name of Tissendorf comes by, and he sees these things, and he goes, this is ancient. Now, he's also a paleographer, but he's not as good as Simonides. So he goes and he shows it to the Catholic Church, shows it to some people, and guess what they do? They start spreading around, say, oh, we found an ancient text. So Simonides sees this and says, hang on, this is mine. I'm the one that did this. And he goes and tells various people, and they don't believe him because of the push and the pressure to say this is correct. And he became a less prominent paleographer because of that. And he even had the monks give testimony that he was working on it. So you have Tissendorf that stole it from St. Catherine's Monastery. Nobody gave him permission to take it. He just took it. 2, the monks said Simonides actually was writing on this, and he was working on this. And that's why if you look at it, you'll see a lot of corrections in the the left side of the left column because he's trying to figure out the language and so how the positioning. And so he made some corrections on the left side. And he knew all the corrections, but they never wanted to have a court case about this. So not only are there a lot of corrections in the Sinaiticus, Simonides says it was his, and I believe him because of, you have testimony from the monks at that time. You have him stating, I made this change here, I made this change here. And you're like, how does he know that if he never made those changes? And he frequented the St. Catherine's Monastery many times and took it on parchment. Some people may say, no, it is old. Look at the dating. I think the dating's on the paper. So this guy was an experienced paleographer. So his writing of the coin grid must have been very good. So forget about that. He was copying the old style. He knew that. The paper itself, it's old. Is it from 300 AD? I don't know. They say that. I don't think it is at all. But they say the paper is. But who cares about the paper? I'm talking about the actual text itself. And so those 3,000 Greek words that are missing from that, because he left it out. He sometimes made mistakes. And so the Vaticanus was there to support the Sinaiticus. It never came out before that. It wasn't saying, oh, we have a copy from 1500s. Nobody even cared. It was like late 1500s. Who cares? But when the Sinaiticus came out, then they brought another text to try and support the Sinaiticus. And so it leaves out, like I said, Mark 16 from 9. You have it in the Aramaic, which is earlier. You have it in this one, which is the Diatessaron. You have it in there. You have it in, obviously, the Latin. So then you got 400 AD. You have it in the Latin, which is a 1000. Sorry, this one here. You have it in the 1000 or 900 AD Latin. You have it in 1300 AD Latin. So you see it, you have it there, and you say, well, maybe they added it in. Let's say they added it in on the 300 AD. They added it in. What's the chances of that? So then you say, okay, let me look at early church leaders. Does any church leaders talk about these passages? And yes, they do. There's a lot of them during the same time period, actually earlier than that, actually quote it. They actually quote a piece of it. So how can you quote a piece of something that doesn't exist? And so I would challenge everybody, if you really believe the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus is the older one, do yourself a favor and actually do the research yourself, and you'll see that it doesn't hold water. And look in Simonides, what happened. Look at this whole situation. Look at early church leaders quoting it. Look at earlier manuscripts in different languages. They didn't make it up. And so the 3,000 Greek words that they will say is added is wrong. It's actually, they took it out. Firstly, it was an error by Simonides to leave some of those things out. But besides that, they were pushing this. Why do they want to push this? Because they want to show the discrepancy in the scripture. And now everybody says, oh, the critical text is better. The critical text is better, which is 1881. So it's an 1881 compilation. So hopefully this has given you some insight of the English translations based on the source text, whether it is Aramaic, Greek, Latin, or even Hebrew. Okay. God bless. Okay. Bye-bye.